and commodity expert, we understood the basics of commodity cycle. Commodity price cycles have several phases, including booms, slumps, and super cycles. Let's take that point further and understand how long do commodity cycles last and whether it is possible to predict the start and end of a commodity cycle. We now have Mr. Chi Chandrasekhar yet again. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time out and speaking with us here on ET Now. And first up, help us understand, why is understanding of commodity cycles so important for all of us and especially for businesses?
Well, commodity cycles are like business cycles. And obviously, those in business need to understand the cyclical nature of business, how businesses start, thrive, peak, then depending on various developments, including technological developments, businesses also start to slow down and occasionally even perish. And therefore, commodity cycles are very much like business cycles. The cyclicity is the same, but the duration of the cycle may vary depending on which commodity we are talking about. We have energy products, we have metals, we have agriculture, and therefore on occasions during some cycles, all the commodities, whether energy or metals or agriculture, all of them will boom. There are other occasions when selectively commodities will boom. It could be only metals, it could be only energy, or it could be only agriculture. Therefore, it is important for all of us to understand that commodity cycles are reasonably similar to business cycles. And it is important for those stakeholders in the commodities market to understand the cyclical nature of the market, so that they will be able to read advanced signals and they'll be able to plan their businesses.
Commodity cycles are very similar to business cycles, and it is very important for all of us to understand that. But sir, help us understand, how long have commodity cycles historically lasted? I understand it's different for different commodities, but help us understand, say for crude oil and for precious metals, historically, how long have they lasted?
In fact, cycles last from 5 years, 10 years, up to 50 years, for example. And the classic example is that you mentioned crude oil. The crude oil story actually started in the early 70s. Okay, crude oil was available for less than $10 a barrel. But then there was a realization within the oil-producing countries that well, they have a gold mine in hand, but they are throwing it away at very low prices. And therefore, from that time, oil prices started to rise, and the world started to demand more and more oil, because that was a fairly economical source of energy for the world. And that cycle has actually lasted 50 years. Okay, and now that cycle, in my view, is gradually coming to an end, particularly with energy transition. And countries are all pledged to reduce the carbon footprint. They are talking about decarbonization and energy transition. Therefore, this crude oil cycle, which has delivered enormous wealth to the oil-producing countries over the last 50 years, now slowly is beginning to wane because of climate change and other factors. And that's the kind of cycle. But there are other cycles. For example, you take country-related commodity cycles. China's growth story started some 30 years ago. And China was a major producer, processor, consumer, importer or exporter of a wide range of commodities, whether it was energy products, whether it was metals, whether it was agriculture commodities. China became the mover and shaker of the commodities market over the last 30 years. But what happened in the last 2 or 3 years? That extraordinary, remarkable growth of China. In some years, their GDP growth rate touched 10, 11, 12%, double-digit growth. It started to, in the last 5 or 6 years, started to decline, and it's currently about less than 5%. Okay, and therefore that China's growth story, China is slowing down very clearly. which obviously is affecting the commodity markets in a big way. Therefore, there could be commodity-specific growth stories. There could be country-specific commodity growth stories or commodity cycles, etc. And China is a classic example of an overall commodity growth or commodity cyclical story, given the fact that China has a big role to play, or had until very recently a very big role to play in energy products, in all the metals, industrial metals, base metals, precious metals, and of course major agriculture commodities like grains, like oil seeds and oils. You had cotton, etc., etc. All those big ticket commodities. Therefore, that is a country wise. There are also cycles which are driven by countries. For example, China.
China has clearly been a big influencer in the global commodity market, but sir, also wanted to understand, how do you see India's positioning in the global market, in the global commodity market shape up, say, over the next 10 or 15 years?
I'm actually now thinking, and in some way I'm convinced the next growth story for commodities is most likely to come from India. Okay. And why am I saying this? Because our growth, our GDP growth over the next 25 to 30 years, in my view, is going to be substantially driven by commodity markets, substantially driven by commodity production, commodity processing, commodity consumption, commodity import, or commodity export. For our growth is going to be commodity intensive. And we are probably going to be the next China as far as commodity markets are concerned. But the point very clearly, China is in a very different league altogether. They're streets ahead. But the direction in which our economy is going, our country is going, the direction is very clear that India is going the China way as far as commodity markets are concerned. And it would be energy products, it would be all kinds of metals, and of course, agriculture commodities. These are going to drive our economy over the next 25 to 30 years. And we are in that expansionary phase. We are in that growth trajectory where the positive relationship between economic growth and commodity consumption will be proven. It's already proven as far as China is concerned, or the global economy is concerned. We are going to add to that evidence, or to that empirical evidence, or the proof that along with economic growth, commodity consumption would rise.
India is going the China way, and India could be the next China as far as commodity markets are concerned. Very strong words coming in over there as far as India's positioning in the global commodity market is concerned. But which phase of the current commodity cycle, sir, do you believe are we in right now?
We are actually currently in a state of flux. Let me tell you very clearly. We are in a state of flux, and it will be rather difficult to say which part of the cycle we are in. That is number one. For example, why am I saying this? For example, energy products like crude oil, I think the future does not look bright. I think that cycle is waning now. It was waxing until 10, 15, 20 years ago, until 5 years ago. But that cycle is now waning. That cycle is losing its steam. The whole world realizes that carbon is not good. Therefore, we are talking about decarbonization. Therefore, say in the next 10 or 15 years, you will see a very substantial decline in crude oil demand for crude oil, or demand consumption of crude oil, and slowly that would possibly die a natural death at some stage, maybe 25 years from now. We don't know. Second, technological breakthrough. We've had fantastic technological breakthrough in terms of, for example, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are by their very nature metals intensive. Electric vehicles will not consume gasoline or diesel, but they they run on they run on electric power, and therefore the demand for both gasoline and diesel will substantially reduce in the coming years as we move rapidly towards electric vehicles.
Demand for gasoline and fuel will come down drastically over the next few years. That's the word coming in. But what about base metals? Do you expect demand for base metals will continue to remain as strong as it has been for the last 15-20 years?
Renewable energy sources like solar, for example. That renewable energy sources are also highly metals intensive. Like electric vehicles are metals intensive. Renewable energy sources are also metals intensive, primarily for example, manufacture of solar panel. And therefore, we will need a lot of metals. Therefore, we will now say from now on, or in the next 2 or 3 years, and certainly starting 2030, there will be a big metals boom that I can foresee very clearly. Even in electric vehicles, it is not just the vehicle which is metals intensive, but look at the charging infrastructure. That is also metals intensive. And solar panels are metals intensive. Therefore, our next phase, once the crude oil cycle wanes, the next cycle which has started actually, and I must mention, yes, this cycle has started particularly for industrial metals and base metals. It started to grow, and this growth, in my view, will continue at least for 25 to 30 years until there is another, hopefully another major technological breakthrough which will disrupt the electric vehicles market. We don't know in what shape that disruption would come, but disruptions will come. It's in the nature of things, nature of development. But the next 25 to 30 years, in my view, will be the market for major metals, industrial metals, base metals, and some, of course, very rare minerals and rare earths, etc. Like you have cobalt and lithium and so on.
Metals, precious metals, industrial metals and rare earth minerals will continue to remain very strong. Mr. Chandrasekhar, thank you so much for taking your time out and speaking with us here on ET Now. Let's shift focus to our next segment, Did You Know? And